Why are thousands of brand new electric vehicles rotting in massive graveyards across the outskirts of Hangzhou, Chongqing, and Shanghai? Today, we are analyzing the China EV graveyard phenomenon to see exactly where the engineering blueprints and the green energy subsidies for this $100 billion megaproject fell apart. By the end of this investigation, you will understand the subsidy feedback loop, a specific economic glitch that allowed companies to profit more by abandoning cars in a field than by selling them to customers. And I will reveal the terrifying battery autopsy that explains why these thousands of vehicles can never be recovered, even for parts. Most people think these cars were simply outclassed by newer models like Tesla or BYD. They weren't. They were designed to be abandoned. We're looking at a forensic architectural failure of an entire industry. If you are fascinated by the hidden flaws in massive infrastructure and the hubris of state-sponsored manufacturing, you are in the right place. Subscribe, because every collapsed industry leaves a blueprint, and we're here to decode it. I've always been fascinated by how a single microscopic miscalculation in a government policy can lead to a mountain of wasted steel and lithium. Once you understand the physics of the battery and the math of the Chinese subsidy system, the sight of these ghost fleets starts to make total sense. To understand the collapse, we have to look at the engineering fundamentals clearly. A typical electric vehicle is built around its battery pack, the most expensive and chemically sensitive component. But in the early 2010s, China launched the 10 Cities, 1,000 Vehicles program. The goal was to dominate the global EV market by sheer volume. However, the engineering reasoning at the time prioritized speed of production over energy density or longevity. These early cars were essentially compliance vehicles, basic shells with low-range batteries built not to satisfy a driver, but to satisfy a quota. Imagine a sea of white and green hatchbacks stretching as far as a drone can see, overgrown with weeds and sinking into the mud. Let's look at the actual blueprints of this disaster. For a car to qualify for the massive government subsidies, which at one point could cover up to half the cost of the vehicle, the car had to be sold and registered. But the policy didn't specify that the car had to be sold to a human being. Watch what happens when you create a market where the buyer and the seller are the same person. Manufacturers would set up shell companies or ride-hailing startups, sell the cars to themselves using government money, register them to claim the subsidy, and then realize they had no actual passengers to drive them. The result is what you see in these fields, a $100 billion ghost fleet. According to the industrial reports, these cars are a ticking environmental time bomb. This is where the physics of the disaster becomes urgent. A lithium-ion battery is a complex chemical reactor. When a battery sits at a 0% state of charge for months or years, a process called copper dissolution occurs. The internal chemistry breaks down and microscopic metal fibers called dendrites begin to grow. If you were to try and jumpstart one of these abandoned cars today, those dendrites could cause an internal short circuit, leading to a thermal runaway event. Essentially, the car would turn into a self-sustaining chemical fire that cannot be extinguished by water. This is why these cars aren't being sold on the used market. They are structurally and chemically unstable. The engineers ignored the long-term degradation reports to meet short-term production targets. Here's what most people get wrong about this disaster. Men who value forensic truth need to understand that this wasn't just a failure of a few small startups. This involved some of the largest players in the Chinese automotive space. The myth is that these cars were old and used up, but if you look at the interiors, many still have the plastic wrap on the seats. They have less than 50 miles on the odometer. They weren't destroyed by natural disasters or high mileage. They were destroyed by a business model that treated the car as a financial derivative rather than a transport machine. The concrete of this industry failed because it wasn't cheap. It failed because the registration trap meant that once the subsidy was collected, the car had fulfilled its only purpose. Maintaining it, parking it, or even recycling it would cost more than the car was now worth. From a physics standpoint, the sheer waste of energy and materials is staggering. Each one of these cars represents roughly 8 to 10 tons of CO2 emitted during the manufacturing of the battery and the steel. By abandoning them, the carbon footprint of this green project became larger than if the world had simply kept driving internal combustion engines. This matters today because as the West pushes for its own EV mandates, we're seeing the exact same structural compromises being proposed. When you prioritize a top-down mandate over the organic math of supply and demand, you don't get a revolution, you get a graveyard. The hubris was thinking you could skip the technological evolution of the battery and just manufacture your way to the future. But here's the most terrifying detail the satellite imagery reveals. These graveyards aren't shrinking. In some regions, they are growing. As the next generation of EV technology arrives, the gap between these ghost cars and modern vehicles grows wider. The cost of extracting the lithium, cobalt, and nickel from a degraded, unstable battery pack is currently higher than mining new minerals from the earth. The autopsy of the disaster showed that China's recycling infrastructure is years away from being able to handle the volume of these abandoned fleets. We are looking at a geological layer of the future, a stratum of 2016-era technology buried under 2026-era weeds. Let's look at the actual blueprints of the battery chemistry one more time. The SEI layer, or solid electrolyte interface, is a protective film that forms on the battery's anode. In a healthy, frequently used EV, this layer is stable. In these abandoned fleets, the SEI layer has thickened to the point where the battery's internal resistance is too high to ever function again. This is where the math falls apart. Even if a technician wanted to refurbish these cars, they would have to replace the entire drivetrain. It's an engineering dead end. Most people don't realize the physics at play, that a car can die simply by standing still. The real-world application of this disaster is a warning to every modern economy. If you look at the global lithium market, it was artificially inflated by the demand to build these ghost cars. When the bubble burst and the graveyards were discovered, the price of lithium crashed, hurting legitimate manufacturers and slowing down the transition to real sustainable energy. This makes the video feel urgent because we are currently deciding how to build our own infrastructure. Are we building for use or are we building for the spreadsheet? The lateral pressure of geopolitical competition forced China to pour 10 million tons of concrete and steel into a project that had no foundation in reality. So the reason this $100 billion ghost fleet exists comes down to three things: a subsidy system that incentivized registration over usage, a total lack of oversight regarding shell company sales, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the chemical shelf life of lithium-ion batteries. It was a perfect storm of management ego and engineering shortcuts. They built a fleet that could win on paper, but lost to the laws of physics and economics. As we look at the aftermath, the summary is clear. China now dominates the EV market, but they did so by stepping over a massive pile of industrial waste. The successful companies we see today, the ones actually selling cars to people, are the survivors of a brutal, wasteful war of attrition funded by the Chinese taxpayer. The ghost graveyards are the silent monuments to the soldiers who were never meant to fight. If you learned something new from this investigation into the forensic reality of the EV industry, subscribe. Next, we're breaking down why China's perfect megacity, Xianghan, is still largely empty despite having the world's most advanced 5G infrastructure and automated transit systems. The blueprint error in their top-down urban planning might surprise you. Next time you see a headline about a green revolution, remember the graveyards. Every collapsed structure leaves a blueprint, and we are here to decode it. The autopsy of the ghost fleet is a reminder that in the world of engineering, if it sounds too good to be true, the math usually falls apart. If you're interested in more deep dives into the hidden flaws of our modern world, I'll see you in the next investigation.